to talk about today is partly, obviously, about harmony, but also because the title of my talk is about the future of patient involvement in blood cancer. I will bring you some outlook and some perspectives about where things are going right now, as we see in different patient communities, and also in what is called currently patient-led research, where we believe that harmony plays an essential and a key role in hematologic malignancies, and it also lays out a template, a roadmap for further development also in other different disease areas. Next slide, please. You will be aware that there are these 9 European umbrella organizations involved in the patient cluster of harmony. And this presentation today was put together in collaboration with Jan Geisler, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today, and Solène Clavreul, who we already heard today, and she's been instrumental in keeping the scientific work of the patient cluster going. Now, next slide, please. All of the work that we've been doing has been integrated now within the big data for blood cancer movement, even, or concept, as worked out together with Ellen. And I want to express our gratitude to Ellen for all the work that she's put into this and into the support of the patient cluster as well. Next slide, please. Quickly, I would like to recap on some of the issues and outcomes that we've seen so far from the patient side, from the patient perspective. I must admit that indeed there has been some progress in acknowledging the patient community's contributions, and I think that's really very good. Also, on the other hand, the patient community, the patient cluster, has also undertaken massive efforts to upscale its skill sets and its capacity, such as, for example, now we are working together with Solène from Myeloma Patients Europe, who is responsible for steering the scientific work, being a scientist herself, steering the scientific work of the patient cluster. There is also now a standard operating procedure for patient involvement in harmony, and we strongly suggest and actually urge you to look at the SOP and to start implementing it, because it gives a very good outline for how patients can, not just should, but can be implemented or integrated into the research process, and it's based on a well worked out methodology, which I will very quickly highlight in one of my next slides. However, there are certain processes that have been stalling, especially when it comes to respecting the patient's requests and asks. This has changed a little bit now with the different presentations that we've heard so far. So, for example, I want to echo what Solène said about PROs and quality of life data and their prioritization, because I think it's a tremendously important step forward from the patient perspective. However, as things stand now, the inclusion and analysis of QOL data, quality of life data, is not really on par of other or with other data domains. There's another issue around the early involvement of patients in designing research questions or coming up with research questions and designing research. Sometimes there are issues around the continuous consultation with patients or patient experts when the research is done, and we really would like to see some results. I mean, interim results or final results, which is then also, from the projects that have been running or are being run on the platform. And also in this context, I would like to once again kindly ask you to consider the inclusion of patient authors not just because it makes sense and it's in line with the spirit of harmony, but also increasingly at scientific journals, you will find that the inclusion of a patient author actually adds points to your presentation and are more preferably viewed by the reviewers as well if you have patient authors included in your papers. So I know this sounds maybe a bit tokenistic, but on the other hand, it also brings you all the benefits and all the knowledge that the patient community can provide. And so we do acknowledge that harmony is extremely innovative and it's also very promising. So I don't know to what extent you've been checking the literature, but actually if you try to understand what's happening in hematologic malignancies and big data, then I mean like 90% of the references go to harmony. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and this really is pioneering and groundbreaking work. And I think that it's really time, together with the patients, to let more literature emerge from this. So please do publish your results. Please do be proactive with what the results and what the outcomes are or could be, and do that together with us, with the patients, because there is capacity, there is knowledge, there are skills in this patient cluster to join you also in the publication and write-up processes and in the analysis of the different outcomes and results that you generate. Next slide, please. So there is a strong belief in the patient community about the power and the importance of big data, and there are various reasons for why we do believe in this, and it's just very straightforward. I don't think you will find anything new here. There's one thing maybe that takes us a little further, which is that, I mean, the patient part, so the last 2 points, which is that the patient participation in big data initiatives does increase the trust in the processes, in the research processes, and in the development, and also it just adds, it leverages on the understanding and insight of the patients and citizens. Also, there's an increasing trend. Also, if you look at the WHO, if you look at what the Lancet and the Financial Times are writing about, when they say that data is the new determinant of health, or that data is the new oil, that means that actually it changes the entire social contract, if you like, that exists between society, citizens, and researchers, patients and researchers, patients and the pharmaceutical industry. And so citizen-controlled data collection, citizen-led, citizen-controlled data interpretation and analysis is increasingly becoming more and more important. And we do believe that actually harmony provides an excellent example for how it can be done in a meaningful way. But of course, for this, it's essential that we do it together also internally within harmony. Next slide, please. We hear oftentimes that, and also in the ethics debates around in the earlier stages of harmony, we were talking about the willingness of patients, of citizens to share their data. But we know there is research into this, that actually patients are willing to share their data. So these privacy and data protection concerns are not really justified if you talk about research, if you talk about the use of data for research purposes and for improving outcomes and for improving treatment options. So we suggest that there's a lot more that could be done because patients are willing. So when it comes to real-world data, when it comes to real-world evidence, there is a willingness, there is a preparedness on the patient side to share their data if they understand what the data will be used for and if they have some certainty about this use. So, which is demonstrated on the next slide. So please take me to the next slide. So that the biggest concerns of the patients when it comes to sharing their health data is sharing this information on to third parties without consent. So that's the biggest concern, which obviously can be ruled out with the right guarantees and disclosures. Or that your data are being used in a different context than what was originally agreed for the sharing. Again, I mean, it just if you treat the patients with respect and you don't abuse their data, then they have no major issues with sharing these data with you. So real world evidence is not entirely excluded. Next slide, please. We still see a lot of silos also in big data, in artificial intelligence. However, as Jan demonstrates very well in this slide, these silos are not for the pharmaceutical industry. It's impossible to interpret big data in silos, right? So this simply doesn't make sense. That's why we argue that we have to move away from this approach, and we have to move towards big data sets, big databases, and the federation and combination of different data silos in order to come to meaningful results. Next slide, please. I mean, there are some key issues why we think that it makes sense from the patient perspective. First of all, breaking down the silos, but also quickly being able to quickly share and consolidate data and to learn from them. Also, improving the characterization of different cancers. So again, Harmony is the platform, but why not use this platform also then eventually spread it out, cast a wider net, and start including other cancer types eventually. Maybe this can be an option for the future for the sustainability of Harmony as well. But also the redefinition of treatment goals or changing the evolution of the design of clinical studies and all these points. I mean, again, this is something that Farzad was already talking about, so I don't want to go into a lot of details. Next slide, please. Another point of critique that we usually get is that it's not. I mean, it's almost impossible. It's so complicated to include patients in the research process and in the development processes, but that's actually not true. This methodology has been around for years now, and it's been published several times, and it's being used as the blueprint for patient involvement. And actually, the standard operating procedure for patient involvement in Harmony is based on this roadmap, which was previously worked out by Jan and a couple of other people in the patient community, in the patient education field. So there are very workable, very straightforward, well-described models that all of you in Harmony and also outside of Harmony can use when it comes to patient involvement. And this creates actually a common language between the patient communities and Harmony or other research initiatives, because this is what the patients have been following as well. So it only makes sense to rely on this type of knowledge. Next slide, please. Now, we also acknowledge that there are massive opportunities in the digitalization of health, not just because this is like the latest trend and everybody's talking about this, but we also saw this in action. We saw the importance of this during the COVID pandemic, right? So we saw how telemedicine, how telehealth services increased, how much more could be done simply by the digitalization of certain processes. Also, this allows us to capture the true needs and the experience of the patients by using wearables or apps or many other possibilities that are there, and also that this is valid information and validated evidence if you use the right methodology. So. And it can also make sure that data flows in both ways. So it's not just that patients contribute data to research or to a certain database, but also vice versa, that this data then can become available for the patients themselves because ultimately it's forced to believe that patients are not interested in their own health data. They really usually want to know what's going on in their bodies and with their health or what they can expect. Now, next slide, please. We also recognize that there's a certain contradiction here in terms of how research and development traditionally works, and how that is being influenced by these very rapid cycles in the digital world. But we also believe that it's possible to bring these together. And again, I want to call your attention to the fact that a lot has been done in patient communities in order to combine these two processes. And there are proposals, there are suggestions from patient organizations, from patient communities on how to do that. So certain federations of patient organizations have been working very intensively on this, and I'm happy to give you more information about that if you're interested. Let's go to the next slide, and let's also immediately skip this one because we don't need this for lack of time. So where we see additional challenges is actually this this discussion around controlling and owning data. So who has the power to control and who has the power of ownership over the data? And because this is so unclear and so poorly regulated at this point, which is not your fault, not our fault, that's just how the situation is at this point, that this also leads, this lack of clarity or this lack of common standards, this then also leads to the result that patient engagement remains a claim, and there's no real content and there's no real action behind this claim. Once again, big data allows us to leverage on a much broader pool of patient data and thereby also on a much broader pool of patients, which will then increase the validity and credibility of the data that you rely on. Next slide. This is what we have today. This is what we used to have. This is how the past looked like. So there's the pharmaceutical industry, there are the clinicians, also there are the authorities, and then there are the individual patients who are dwarfed by the authority and by the sheer financial and political power of the other three stakeholders. Next slide. Now, what we see emerging now as the default digital health model is one more stakeholder added here, which is the tech industry. And we have the funny but scary elephant here in the room. And I want to refer back to the fact that the biggest fear of patients is that their data are handed over to third-party data processors without their knowledge and without their information, and then they don't know what happens to these data. And that's exactly what we see happening very often, especially with tech, with major tech companies that have been collecting massive data, also from the health domain, where we believe that with the conscious use of platforms like Harmony, we can counter this movement, and we can say that we can do this for ourselves. And this is something where we don't need input, we don't need the control of tech companies just to keep the system going, because we've done it and we can continue doing it. Next slide, please. So what is the model that we want? Is it the default digital health model, or is it the default advocacy model? How can these be combined, right? So how can we bring all these different concepts together? Next slide. And there we believe that the desired future model is a collaborative one, right? So it's a leveraged, balanced, collaborative model where the industry, authorities, clinicians, and also the tech companies can work together with the patient communities on an equal footing. So this means obviously more respect, a federation of data, and better inclusion, more meaningful, more respectful inclusion of patients in this process. For this, also, next slide, please. Also, certain basic principles have been worked out that we've been relying on, organized around what's called the 5EI guiding principles in the generation of health data, or in the generation of data related to citizens actually in general. So which looks at interests and then decides on whether investment or involvement are the right, or which combination of investment and involvement is the right way to go. Then comes implementation, and then the impact and the measurement of the impact, which all should happen together with the involvement of all stakeholders. Next slide, please. What provides a good opportunity here is giving actually the key to data to the people, right? So first of all, the citizens have a right to carry their data with themselves. So data portability is a right that's granted by GDPR, at least in Europe. So they must have access to their health data as well. And also, we know that patient organizations are, because their interest is only related to the patient's well-being and to making sure that outcomes are improved. Patient organizations are not there to make a profit or to make politics, but they are there to protect and to represent the patient's interests. So they are the ideal custodians of data, and they are the ones who can meaningfully and impactfully lead on data federation and on the aggregation and analysis of data, obviously together with you, together with clinicians and data scientists. So that goes without saying. However, this understanding of the bottom-up approach and this understanding of the importance of citizen control is there in the patient organizations already. So next slide, please. How does this work? What does this mean if patient organizations are data cooperatives, right? So what is then the, by the way, this is also something that's been heavily promoted by the WHO and by some researchers like Boye Eliassen from Norway, who say that data cooperatives are the way to go, and that data cooperatives should be citizen controlled. How this works is described in this slide. I will not go into much detail. You will be able to read up this on the slides. But there are examples, because I know that there are regularly, we hear about doubts, can this be done at all? It has been done. Next slide, please. If you, for example, look at what RareX has done in the US with their data platform, their federated data platform for rare diseases, which is now the strongest in Duchenne. That's exactly what they have been doing. RareX is a rare disease patient organization in the US, not the largest one. It's I would say a medium-sized patient organization, but they have been able to build a federated data platform where they are the custodians of the data. They manage the platform, and they also assist all the other stakeholders in the distribution and analysis of the data that is stored on the platform and collected on the platform. Next slide. So the question is, are we ready for this? Are we ready for giving data to the patients, and or are we just going to continue as before, right? So that the patient is only the second fiddler and will not be really able to control what's happening to their data. We argue that we should go the way and in the direction of more data to the patients and working more closely with the patient communities. Now, and my last slide, the next one is what the future holds, more or less. So next slide, please. Ooh. Thank you. So, what does the future hold? We can see that there's an increased emphasis on self-care in healthcare governance as well. Again, look at the WHO guidelines or what other international organizations have been saying. Self-care, however, is impossible without solid data, better health literacy, and education. And this is reliant on data, obviously. So this is reliant on solid evidence, which is underpinned by data. Now, also, patients gain an increasing role in data sharing and governance discussions, right? Because and that's why they should also be leading on data governance, right? The citizens. Also, because, as I said before, all other stakeholders have vested interests in not sharing their own data. They also want to have access to others' data. However, for the patients, for the citizens, what's most important is actually that they have access to all data, and then they can also work with everyone. Being in the center, we've always been saying that the patient is in the center. So put the patient in the center, because they will be able to work with all the different stakeholders at once and are not controlled by particular interests other than the well-being of the patient and other than better outcomes. Many of these questions have already been answered in Harmony, right? So data safety, we've spoken for years about data safety. We have a robust model with anonymization. We have a robust model with the consents, what happens in this case, what happens in that case. And there's also a patient engagement process, as I said, so we just have to use it. And we strongly believe that this is, data sharing and patient involvement are key to ensure the feasibility of Harmony. And that's why we've been shouting about this for the last 5 years. And I'm so happy to see that there's a lot of development and a lot of new impetus coming into this process. So I think this is really, really great, because we do have a workable model. We have a robust, good model, and it just needs to be sustained and it needs to be promoted so that people see how good it has been. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Tamas. I think we are a little bit constrained about the time because of the local authorities here in Netherlands just provide several rules about how the time in which we have to finish. Maybe if there is one couple of questions, but very, very short one, maybe we can try to do it, how to manage. Helen?
Yeah, thank you. It's really short. I hope people understand. I saw a question from Gastone Castellano, and I read it out loud now. What is the perception of patients on artificial intelligence methods for data analytics? Did you hear it, Tamas?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Come again?
The question for you is from Gastone Castellani. What is the perception of patients on artificial intelligence methods for data analytics?
Oh. It's I don't think that there's like an ultimate standpoint or opinion about this that's codified or written down. But I know from conversations in a recent project with several patient organizations from across the world, that there is an impression that the technology is already there. The tools with artificial intelligence and other technologies are already there. However, apparently we're still very much enamored and fascinated with the technology instead of the objectives and what it should be used for. And so it's unclear what the outcomes are, can be, or should be, but there's just this fascination about the technology itself. And so the patient communities are now at the stage when they say it's good, it's really good that we have these technologies, but what are we going to use it for? What are those key points where you can actually really have a meaningful outcome. So I think that it's more about the conceptualization of what should happen, and not so much talking about the technology itself.